This is Richard Wolff from Democracy at Work, responding to another Ask Prof. Wolff question from a supporter of Democracy at Work, namely David. And I want to thank David for posing the question very simply and clearly. What are the roles, or the role, if you like, of U.S. Treasury bonds in the functioning, the problems, the failures of modern capitalism? What are Treasury bonds is where I'm going to start, because they are a very important part of the story. Treasury bonds are simply the borrowing by the United States government, the U.S. Treasury to be particular, a branch of the government in Washington, D.C. It borrows money in part to pay for the services it provides. Social Security checks, uh, manning the harbors, regulating the businesses, the Defense Department, all of the things that the federal government does, the many different things. Now, let's be clear. The government could pay for the services it provides by taxing. Governments do that on a regular basis. The government of the United States has, in various points, and this is true for state and local governments as well, relied on taxes for 100% of the revenue they need to perform the public services we ask our government to do. And the only time the government borrows is if it wants to spend but does not want to tax to raise the money it wants to spend. That is a political choice always. No, no one should believe that there's anything automatic or necessary or handed down as if by God to have governments borrow. So let's begin. Corporations and the rich in our society don't like to pay taxes. The mass of people don't like to pay taxes. It's kind of a truism. You want the government to do all kinds of things to help you, but you don't want to foot the bill in taxes to pay for it. That's pretty much universal. The problem is corporations and the rich have the profits of our society in their hands. We all work, we all help to produce the profits, but the corporations get them. And one of the things they do with them is pressure the politicians not to tax them. And the politicians have to be listening and behaving accordingly. The mass of people don't have that money. The mass of people don't make the donations the way the corporate rich do. And so over time, the taxes get shifted in most capitalist countries off of corporations and the rich to a large extent and on to the mass of people. But you can't do that forever. Let me give you an example here in the United States. 100 years ago, more than, we passed an income tax in this country, federal income tax, designed from the beginning to hit the richest people. Over the last 100 years, the richest people worked their political magic buying the politicians who shifted the burden of taxation. So today, only half of our federal government's receipts come from taxes. Really? Well, where do they come from? Not the tax system we set up 100 years ago, because that was progressive. The higher your income, the more of it you had to pay in taxes. The rich don't like that. So now half the taxes the federal government gets come from the Social Security system, where everybody is taxed at the same rate. And that's a wonderful thing for rich people and puts the burden of taxes on average people. Serious problem. What can the mass of people do? Well, they can have a tax revolt. And Americans have done that. We can't stand any more taxes. You can't tax us anymore. And they vote against politicians who propose another tax, and for politicians who say, I won't tax you, I won't tax you. Whether they really do or not, as we all know, is another matter. But now the politicians in our capitalist system are stuck. They can't dare tax the rich and the corporations, and they don't dare tax the mass of people. What are they going to do? Because the corporations and the rich and the mass of people all want government services, and lots of them. Solution: borrow money. And the way that's done is the US Treasury prints a piece of paper. It's an IOU. The federal government will pay you X dollars in this year in the future if you give us those X dollars now. So it's a way of raising money for the government called a Treasury bond. Why is that important? Well, first of all, it is a colossal waste of our money. Why? Because if you tax corporations and the rich, and it would have to be them because the mass of people don't have the money for this government to tax more than it already does. So if you tax corporations and the rich $100, that's the end of the story. The corporations and the rich have 100 less, and the government has 100 more to pay for the services. If you don't do that, you have to borrow the money. But from whom do you borrow? Answer: corporations and the rich, because the mass of people don't have the money. If you look at who the government owes money to, it's corporations and the rich and a few others I'll get to in a minute. But the mass of the American people are not a significant lender to the United States government. So it's the corporations and the rich who refuse to pay taxes, so that the government has to come back to those same people and borrow from them the money it did not tax from them. This is wonderful for corporations and the rich. It's a no-brainer to prefer having a debt, lending $100 to the government, that the government pays you back plus interest over the years while you wait, is way better for corporations and the rich than being taxed. So, of course, they support government borrowing if they feel it's their tax money that they're not going to have to pay in taxes, that instead they can lend. But you also all know, if you think about it, that if the government gets 100 from the corporations by taxing them, that's the end of the story. If the government gets $100 loan, issuing that Treasury bond to get it, they are going to have to pay that money back and pay interest. It's a much more expensive way to raise money for government services than to tax corporations and the rich. The Treasury bond is therefore a subsidy for corporations and the rich. They're the ones who get out of the taxes because they're the most able to pay, and they're the ones who benefit from the Treasury bond because it's a substitute for paying taxes that keeps the money in their hands and earns them interest, even though it makes running the government that much more expensive. There is much more to say, but I wanted this basic understanding to show you that it's a system geared towards corporations and the rich and not to the rest of us, if that still is news. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I hope you see the value of helping people understand issues like Treasury bonds better than they have. If so, please share this video with others. Help us get the word out. And please go to our website, sign up on our mailing list so we can keep in touch with you to coordinate that partnership. And as always, if you can help with some financial support, that would be appreciated as well. Thank you.